Hello, and welcome to Flip the Script, the podcast from FlipGen that brings young people's voices into the conversations shaping our digital world. FlipGen is a youth-led movement, and through the Digital Rebels community, they're creating spaces where young people can speak openly about their experiences online and help influence the decisions that affect them. In today's episode, we are diving into one of the biggest debates happening right now. Should social media be banned for young people under the age of 16? To explore this question, we were joined by 4 of the Children's Commissioner's ambassadors who came together with FlipGen's Digital Rebels to share their perspectives, experiences, and their ideas about the ban and its potential impact. My name is Lily Mott, and I'm the founder of Be the Change Media Network. I had the privilege of hosting this inspiring conversation, so let's dive right in with our guests, who are going to introduce themselves and share about their relationships with social media to kick off our conversation.
Hi, I'm Ariana. I think for social media, it's had a bit of a mix of an impact on my life. It's had quite a good impact in the way that it kind of lets me express my creativity, quickly find tutorials and recipes, so more lighthearted stuff like that. But on the other hand, I feel like it has had an equally or even more bad impact because of the kind of influence and pressures that come from social media, like stuff like comparison, especially at this age. Comparing your lives to other people is a really easy thing to slip into. So yeah, that's my social media experience.
Hi, my name's Cosima. I'm 19 and I'm from London. I'd say social media has largely had a good impact on me. I think it's connected me with lots of opportunities and lots of people. It's allowed me to find a community that is really beneficial to me. But at the same time, I think it does put a lot of pressure on young people to sort of live up to a standard that isn't always that achievable. But perhaps that's a mirror of what happens in the real world too.
Hello, I'm Lucas Wainwright, the member of UK Youth Parliament for County Durham, and I'm the Youth Ambassador to the Children's Commissioner. Social media has had many different impacts on my life. If I think back to a long time ago when I was in year 6, I was, 10, 11 years old, we had this WhatsApp group chat set up, and I was targeted on there by the rest of the class, and I was bullied, and it was an awful experience where the police had to get involved. So there were some very negative, impacts on my life back then when I had some depression and I needed some real help from family members and people in my community to help me get through that. And then as time moved on, I found some more positive, ways to look at social media through seeing different opportunities. And then that's how I've came to, be able to speak up for other young people in the area. Yeah.
Excellent, yeah. I'm Connor, and I'm from FlipGen. I'm 20, and for me, social media has had a massive impact on my life, both positive and negative. Growing up in North Devon, I didn't have many opportunities, and I didn't understand a lot of what was going on in the wider world. So social media allowed me to build a platform, build a charity in which I could support other young people, teach them about mental health and about digital well-being, and really grow myself and my career and find out different things that I wouldn't have known otherwise without social media.
I'm Allegra and I'm also with FlipGen. And I'm currently 19 and a student studying in London. And for me, I wanted to particularly highlight a good example of where social media has had a really positive impact in a lot of the music stuff I do with my uni, when I'm not talking about social media and regulation or all the other stuff we do with FlipGen. I do a lot of it in the music scene and with music journalism. And I think without social media, specifically sites like Instagram and Facebook, I would not have been able to find the research and the outreach networks that I have been able to do with that. So that's been a really positive experience for me.
Hello, my name is Valerie. I'm 17 and I'm from London. If I had to say what's been good and what's been bad about my experience on social media, I'd have to agree with Allegra on how it's really good in terms of fostering people's creativity and passion. I love food, so I've really appreciated, for example, Instagram Reels on food and dishes from around the world, especially from cultures that, for example, the ones that I don't come from, I really have appreciated that. But one thing that I don't like about social media, or one thing that I've found difficult about being on social media, has just been basically what I would call the isms. So like sexism, racism, ableism. I think that can be really widespread on social media, particularly in, for example, certain conversations and on certain platforms. And that's been really difficult to see, and I think can have a massive effect not only on me but on many young people and people just in society.
Hi, I'm Paddy. I'm from Flipp Gen. I'm 21. I'm from Birmingham. I think the positives of social media for me, I have obsessive compulsive disorder, and I've learned a lot about that through social media, and it's allowed me to really find similar people and make me feel less alone, and allowed me to share my story, which ultimately has really helped me. And negative effects, I struggle with comparison and comparing myself to other people and fear of missing out. And if I see people who share things online, and I look at my own life and start to wonder what I can be doing better. But obviously social media isn't all it's made up to be. But yeah.
Hi, I'm Finley. I don't have social media, but I still think that it has positives and negatives, but I do think the negatives outweigh the positives, especially in the whole doom scrolling and like infinite scroll and algorithms and all of that. So I think social media should be regulated very heavily.
It's really interesting that you don't have social media. I think that's a really valuable perspective to bring to this conversation. My next question for all of you is, when you hear, should social media be banned for under-16s, what is your instinctive reaction and why? And I'm not teeing it up too much because I just want your gut reactions. So anyone who wants, take us away.
I'll kick off. For me, when I hear the news around the social media ban for under-16s, I don't agree with it. I think that it is a temporary plaster on a much bigger issue. And, there is no difference between young people that are, a couple of days before their 16th birthday and a couple of days after their 16th birthday. Yet why should we see in the eyes of the law that they magically changed and should get access to social media? I believe that this is going to cause more issues for young people who are on social media over 16, because the various authorities will say, well, actually, we've done our part. We've made it safer for under 16, so we're not going to do anything for over 16s. So yeah, that's my initial reaction when I hear that.
I would say instinctively I would probably support the ban, but then also say that there would need to be lots of regulation for the social media for when you're after 16. But I do get the points about not being magically more mature after 16. But then again, things like driving and drink also have those dates. So you kind of have to put a date somewhere.
I think for me, I feel that when it comes to the ban discourse, that I understand where everyone is coming from. I think that as a young person, the digital world can be really scary. It must be really scary as a parent to watch that. And then it's instinctive. You just want to turn it off. But I think that we've all, talked about how social media can do a lot for us as young people. It provides a third space. It can connect us with opportunities and connect us with other young people like us. And so I just feel that there is a better way forward that balances the opportunities and the risk in a slightly more targeted way that could make it safer for everyone whilst not cutting off the people that potentially need it the most. Because I know as a young person with a disability, when I couldn't go out and see other people because I had to isolate, the digital world was all I had. And I think that there's a lot of other young people in a similar position that this would stand to overlook.
I also think the fact that a lot of different social medias, and I've been talking to my friends about this and my peers about this, that a lot of social medias are kind of turning into one another. The fact that even LinkedIn now has a Reels function. And you've obviously Snapchat, Instagram, TikTok, they're all examples that would get banned or banned until 16. But all these social medias are turning into one another. And the fact that only a fairly limited list would have the ban applied to it means I'm particularly concerned about people going on to other less regulated, less famous, or less necessarily critiqued in the news or by government regulators already, people would be going onto these sites, which don't have the same safeguards that, due to like the governmental and public pressure, that the really famous social media sites have had to like change their sites as a result of this pressure. These other sites won't have that. And therefore, I'm particularly worried that I don't think the ban would necessarily, it wouldn't be effective from that sense by pushing people to these other spaces.
I think instinctively it's a weird one, because my opinion is potentially different to my instinctive opinion, because I think that when you hear a ban and when you know how much harm is caused on social media, there's that kind of idea of, yeah, let's get rid of it because it is causing so much harm. Around mental health, it's obviously having an impact, but I think that it's not a solution that would work. And I wish I could get rid of social media for all people and go back, but it's Pandora's box and we can't put it all back in. But I don't think a ban would work now. I think that it's quite idealistic in the world, and it doesn't mitigate for the fact that, you know, everything's online. You find out things online, and there is that decrease of third spaces that were there when social media became a big thing. So even though instinctively I see why a ban is an attractive option, I don't think it would work, and I don't think it's the right option.
So when asked the question, would you have a social media ban for under-16s, I immediately think no. I think it will disconnect young people from the opportunities that are available via social media. You know, I found out about the Youth Parliament and Children's Commissioner ambassador role through social media, through young people being like, this is an opportunity for somebody to go out there and represent our community. You should do that. If we get rid of social media, these opportunities won't be around for young people. Or, well, they will be around, but they're not going to be reaching everyone as they should. And I'd just like to paint a picture here. I come from a rural place in County Durham. It's like, how do people connect with each other in rural areas without social media? It's difficult to go and see one another. So, you know, as much as social media has its flaws, you know, it's a way for young people to connect with each other and make friendships, but also to be aware of the opportunities that are out there for them. And without social media, those things are not going to be possible, and young people are just going to become more disconnected from the wider world, from learning about the experiences of different cultures and people from around the world. That's the really good stuff about social media.
I would instinctively react to no in regards to the question. And I would say this for two main reasons. Well, I'm no psychology student, but I do think that like humans, like when they're told no, they might just like fundamentally try and do whatever it is you find them to do. So
Yeah.
I think we see this with, like, for example, the social media ban in Australia. There are people who, like Allegra said, who might have just migrate to other less well-known platforms. And this is not in Australia, but one of the other Children's Commission ambassadors said that for like a social media platform that required like ID as like a form of verification, she just got her mum as proof of ID. So it just kind of goes to show you like the lengths that people will take to bypass these different restrictions and bans. And even just like taking historical examples of like American prohibition, like that was obviously the banning of alcohol, but it didn't necessarily mean that people did not drink alcohol for that time period, and, you know, black markets opened up and whatnot. So I just think on a just like a human behavior sort of level, it could be hard to enforce such bans and restrictions.
Those were some pretty comprehensive gut reactions, I would say. So my next question is, do you think a ban would actually make young people safer, or would it just change the problems and push them elsewhere? I think some of you touched on this, but does anybody want to kick us off?
I think it will make young people a lot less safe, as both of you touched on. It will cause young people to go sort of more underground when it comes to social media. They will still find other ways to access social media. And I think the big thing that always sticks in my head is you can still access social media without an account. You can still watch Instagram videos. You can still watch TikTok, YouTube without an account. And young people will just access social media without that account. And that'll mean there is no way of tracking or regulating what they are watching. So any regulations that were put in place for under 18s, if they're accessing that without a account, then it just won't be done. And yeah, I think, I grew up in the days which you younger ones probably won't remember Omegle. And that was Omegle was a platform, for those that don't know, was you pressed a button and it would broadcast your webcam to another webcam, and you could join, and every 1 minute you would get given another person on this screen, which was their live webcam. As you can imagine, that came with many risks, but that is still a platform that does exist in many iterations today, and that is one that would not come up on that ban.
Yeah.
Meaning young people can still access and communicate with people via webcam, anybody in the world, without any tracking. So, there are all these different platforms that are existing. And if we do ban certain bigger platforms for young people, they might discover these other platforms and start using them, which is far more dangerous than at least speaking to somebody on Snapchat that you do know.
I think that a ban in its blunt form doesn't actually make anything any safer, because quite literally there is no change to the design or the delivery or the allowance of content. Nothing changes, it just gets turned off. And then as soon as you turn 16, it's turned on and everything is as it is now. And I think that that's not so great. I think if legislation to ban social media included incentives to platforms to change the various features we've talked about, like auto scroll and whatever else it is, then okay, maybe we would be in a different place. And I know some of those options are on the table, but just banning it for under 16s, the platform isn't safer, and anyone over 16 is quite literally no safer than they are at the moment. And I know last year when I was 18 at the time, I fell down a rabbit hole of online harm, and this ban in its blunt form wouldn't leave me any safer. So yeah, I think that we can do better. I just think if we're going to do anything, it has to be dynamic, because we don't have one law for the entire real UK. So I don't know why necessarily we would have just one law for all of social media, or to fix all of the problems we have left after the piece of legislation we do have. I think it takes a lot of people coming together and a lot of different measures to target individual issues, rather than just slapping a band-aid over a bullet wound and kind of calling it a day.
And I think that point about fake or not very effective safety blankets is also something that I think is going to catch a lot of parents off guard with the under 16 ban, because I think a lot of the public pressure is coming from parents who are seeing the negative effects that are happening to their children due to the not regulated enough and harmful spaces that their children are entering through social media. So therefore, their gut reaction is get rid of it, ban it, and make sure my child can't access it. However, then when your child, like you were saying, it doesn't actually, without a proper redesign of things, it won't actually solve the problems. So parents will think that by the time their child gets 16, they'll be much safer from it. But then the moment they can access it, and these harmful things are still happening and they're still going on, it will have created this fake safety blanket from their perspective as well.
Especially if digital literacy isn't put in at the same time, because otherwise you're in no better a position than you are at 13, which is where it currently stands. Because you'll never be ready if you're not taught how to navigate it.
I would say I kind of probably agree with that, actually, about how it's really more dangerous because people would go on to less safe places, but I also think the places they use right now are not necessarily safe in their own way, and I think they need to be regulated. For example, I was at my student council and we were discussing what looks like Snapchat has created school groups without the school's knowledge and without moderators, and you have to put the school's email address in, which seems like it's a big breach of safety. So I think those kind of things should be stepped out and removed from these social media companies.
I think I definitely see the point of, if, as Valerie said earlier, that if, you take something away from someone and they're so addicted to it, they're going to find a way around it. Say VPNs, for example, are a big one. Say with games or movies and stuff, people will go use a VPN, they'll try to find a way around it. And then there's also the argument that, that was mentioned a few times about alternative apps coming in that are less moderated. But I feel we need to take into account that I think if we
crack down on it enough, and if we focus on it enough, we can get rid of those apps too. And obviously there's still a possibility of more and more apps being created like as alternatives, but I think there's a lot of external factors that could be incorporated into the ban, like say parents. I feel like I'm not like one who's like, trying to make parents be like, invading like children's privacy, because no kid wants to have their phone checked like multiple times by their parents, like on regular occasions. But I think if parents are like, I can't remember who mentioned that they're becoming like, more aware of the harmful effects that social media has on kids. I think they need to be made aware on how the ban also wouldn't work, so that if the ban does happen, if it did take place, they could take further precautions to make sure their kids aren't actively seeking out the harmful stuff that they will see on social media. Because hypothetically, like banning social media for kids under 16, it's like if it's banned for everybody, no one's going to be comparing themselves, no one's going to be jealous that the other has it. So in theory, it is like, in my eyes, I see it as like a good idea. But there's also the flip side, where will it actually work, and how effective will it, actually be, and is it kind of like the thing about just putting a band-aid over it and then making it worse in the long term? So I think there's a lot to think about here.
Is there any information about how Australia's what's going? Because I don't know
I
how long
think
it's been
it's-
going.
I have really good friends who are in Australia and who have siblings who are under 16. I said, "Oh, what's it like?" Extremely easy to get past, but even though you have to put a form of ID, like Valerie was saying, she had a friend someone had a friend whose mum could just put the form of ID or create the account for them. And also with the example of VPNs, people signing up to VPNs in other countries, not just for films or games, but for social media now as well. Yeah, it is a bit of a feeling that, especially once you then turn 16, like some people have it, some people don't. But by that point, because the people who are now at this point, like 14, 15, who are turning 16, like they've had it before because they had it last year. And then now it's just taken away from them. They are very much feeling a loss from it. And it is pushing people to, especially in terms of gaming. That's what my friend said. Her younger brother is turning far more to like weird gaming sites that wouldn't really have been touched before.
I think, yeah.
So yeah.
The Australian kids are the biggest users of Roblox now. I think they're averaging like 3 hours a day on Roblox.
I think, they've taken down like 4.7 million accounts, like the last time they reported it, but we don't know like necessarily, at least I don't know how many like they haven't caught, and we also don't know how many new accounts have been made like by like siblings and things over 16 to like get around it. So I think like on paper we're like seeing something, but we haven't had enough time to like review if it works or doesn't. But like anecdotal evidence that we're seeing, I think, is that it needs a little bit of like tinkering, and that like the response amongst young people is like pretty mixed and like pushing people into
How long has it been going on for?
Haven't in
December.
Yeah.
It's very early days.
So
Yeah.
only a month or so.
Yeah, exactly.
And they put the legislation through December 2024, I think. So they had about a year for the social media companies and for the government to go and gear up to it.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. Asking how Australia, because I think everybody's looking at Australia, aren't they? And otherwise we're kind of just going into it a bit blind, and it's difficult to know how it's going to work. There's very little evidence actually on the actual impacts, like quantitatively measuring the impact of social media. So how can we make a policy without that? And there's no real strong evidence either way.
Yeah.
I think the Australian ban is just so drastic. It's going to take the onus off the social media companies to make a change. And, let's say, right, you've got a kid who's 14, their social media account's gone, but they are going to get to 16 and they're going to get on a social media account and be exposed to all the harms that is on social media. And there are positives and negatives to social media, but the companies are now not going to look at and evaluate what negatives they need to take away, for people. So
I think also in terms of legislation, something that like in terms of like if things are progressing or not, like we've only sort of just seen like European and UK legislation like come into force. And so I don't also think we've necessarily given that enough time to like put pressure. Like we're seeing fines coming through and like, but that's like just starting to happen. And from the people I've been speaking to, like, I think platforms are feeling the pressure, and we've seen a couple of those responses, like Instagram putting in like content for under-16s having to be like PG type thing, which obviously is not like a perfect solution, but I think we are seeing some design change, and I think that probably will increase as more and more of these like fines come through for non like compliance with the legislation. And so for me, when it comes to like a social media ban, my like first instinct is to wait for the legislation we do have to do something and then review it, because I feel like that's what we do with like most policies. But then at the same time, obviously we've seen a lot of like shocks and like bad things happen the past few months that have really like bolstered and like sped things up. And we're like, oh my gosh, what can we do? Like there was the whole scandal with Grok and everything else. And of course we're like, oh my God, we need to turn it off. But like if we step back for a second, the Grok thing got shut down. So we can see that like things can be responsive really quickly and like that case by case basis. And so when I think about it as like a policy nerd, I'm like, maybe that like iterative, sorry, that's like really academic language, that like adaptive approach is maybe a bit more like sensible. But this isn't like a logical issue. It's like driven by emotion. And I think that's what we're seeing when it comes to this, like all of the arguments about the social media ban. Like it's such a human issue. We're seeing like harms we've all spoken about, like our experiences of social media. It can be really great, but like the harmful content gets to all of us, like especially depending on like who you are and your identity. It like gets to different parts of your identity, or it can do. And so like the debate is emotionally charged. And I think when we can recognize that and we can have like a sensible conversation, like we all are, like the young people are the nuanced voices in this. And I think like maybe they need to listen to us.
Can I actually jump in here? Because that is my next question. What do you think adults and policymakers get wrong or don't see about growing up online today?
I think it's the education system. There needs to be a lot more funding and attention going towards education, focus groups for parents and schools just to see what their experiences are on first, seeing their children online and how many hours they spare a day. Because, between families and different children, the hours spent online will be different. And the schools need to look at that and then, come up with ideas to, help the parents think about the rules in the home, whether they're adequate enough or whether things need changing, and, to have that sort of collective approach with every voice considered, because there's young people's opinions to be heard, but also the parents and the teachers. Because I was part of the Durham Youth Council meeting on Monday, and there is a sort of like a plan by the people in Stanley, a local town, to implement iPads in pretty much most classes as a education tool. So you've got kids going home and spending time on social media, but then also using the iPad in class to help them learn. So there's the argument about like screen time is, are we going to be spending too much screen time, or will it be helpful? So I think all parties need to be considered before making a change. Yeah.
On that, I think that's a really good point, because I think one thing that people get wrong is the fact that they see all screen time as the same, and higher screen time equals like worse outcomes, when actually like the screen time can offer really good things. We've talked about social media, the connection you get out of it that you can't get. Like people have talked about living in the countryside, and I lived in the countryside, and I can't just get I can't get a bus. I can't, like Xbox. I used to play a lot with my friends on Xbox, and we were talking, and you can watch YouTube videos on really educational things now. And I think there's a growing trend of like, I watch philosophy and debating stuff because I'm a nerd. But I think that is screen time, yes, but actually it's not the same as TikTok. And also there's a really good TikTokers out there who are really positive and are, in terms of mental health, are breaking stigmas down. And I think that kind of gets neglected in the kind of idea that all social media is bad, all screen time is bad, but actually it's about what you do on social media and who you follow, and you can still have really good connection on social media. And I think that's kind of missing from the conversation from adults and policymakers' point of view.
I think it's also the fact that like social media for a lot of us has become like our version of like the youth clubs maybe that like our parents had, because the physical places that like young people used to like hang out are gone. And so especially like those of us that come from like more disadvantaged backgrounds, like that's what we've got. And I think sometimes like the status quo, policymakers maybe thinking about it from like this like idealized point of view where like we have a viable alternative, but like at least right now I don't think we do. And I also think on like the education like angle that you guys have talked about, like I know I'm also a nerd, a massive nerd, and like I know that when I go down like a deep dive of like it's like trade policy. Like, God, I'm so bad. But like when I was trying to figure that out for my essay, and I went to TikTok, the first place I went to for my essay was TikTok to find out about like the impacts of this trade agreement on real people. And okay, maybe that's not the most like academic of me, but it's like such a dynamic place and there's so much out there. And I think that especially for those of us that like, if you're going through something, it's somewhere you can go to feel less alone. And if trust and safety works, like tech policy works and platform safety works, we can reap those benefits. And so if the problem isn't the fact that social media is there, it's the fact that like the harm is there. Like get rid of the harm, not the social media. I feel anyway.
Absolutely. And I think, people don't necessarily understand the positive impact social media has on so many different aspects of the world. Look at the conversations around mental health we're having right now. 10 years ago, the conversation around mental health was completely different. Even before COVID, that conversation was so different. And thanks to social media, we are seeing more and more people talking about it, and it becoming more and more spoken about and more openly discussed. And we're equally seeing things in religion. We're seeing the quite revival in the past couple of years, which is thanks to social media. We're seeing more and more young people going into certain careers. We're seeing young advocates like Greta Thunberg, who thanks to social media is growing the presence of political and environmental factors. So actually social media has had a massive positive impact on a lot of young people, and it is definitely swayed the conversation. And I mean, look at TV right now. Who here actually sits and watches TV at a night nowadays, or who sits and watches the latest film as a 200-part TikTok series? The media in the world is leaning more and more towards social media. And I think that's something we do need to take into account, is actually if media companies are moving more and more towards social media and young people aren't allowed social media, well, are we then missing a whole gap of young people who can't access any media products altogether because all the companies are making stuff specifically for social media and young people can't access that?
I think that point on education and YouTube is very good, because I think Australia banned YouTube in their social media ban.
Yeah, it did.
And I think, especially with long form videos like YouTube, mostly it has the shorts, but no one uses those. But mostly the long form videos are generally very educational. So stuff like YouTube probably shouldn't be banned. Well, I'm pretty sure I read that Discord isn't banned in the social media ban, which seems a bit counterintuitive considering it's a proper social media company and doesn't have all the safeguards of some of the more established ones.
Yeah.
While YouTube is banned, which seems a bit counterintuitive.
I think that's why, like, something that I would say, like, people are missing on this is that you have to talk to young people if you are going to do this and you want it to work, you have to talk to them, because our experience of social media is it is very different to like what it might look like from the outside. So as an adult looking in, you might think that like YouTube is like a really big, like adults who banned it, I guess in Australia, thought it was harmful enough to get rid of it, but maybe didn't consider Discord or whatever other like gaming platforms
existed.
Yeah, they didn't know that it was maybe used by young people in the way that it is. And so I think that's where people are missing the mark and where they really can't afford to, because unless you talk to us, you won't know what to do. And then we'll be back here in a year. And I think it's so key. It's so key that platforms speak to young people so that they can internally make things safer, because I do think that some of them do want to. And if you're like a government, I think you have to equally talk to young people, because otherwise, like, they're your experts. Like, you're regulating their lives. You need them to comply. You have to speak to them. and make sure that it's also a representative group, because young people from London are going to have such a different opportunity, like experience to young people from North Devon or from Birmingham or from near Durham or whatever else it might be. And so that has to happen. Like, I just don't think we have a choice.
And I think that point in listening to youth voices demonstrates how I think a lot at the moment, as a lot of adults and policymakers don't understand quite how inseparable the digital world and real world have become. Because obviously when you think of the digital world, my adults, they probably think of seeing their kids talk to their friends on social media, follow influencers, fine. But your example of finding opportunities through social media, finding third spaces, which then turned into physical third spaces where they met these people on social media, but then could then meet them in person. They become so integrated to one another that you can't have one without the other anymore, because we have our phones in our pockets, by our sides, 24 hours, every day of the week. Back when you would have to go to a computer and log into your social media account.
Yeah.
Then the moment you switch off your computer and you log out of your account, it's out of your life. It's not there anymore.
Yeah.
But they've become so integrated within one another that it's unrealistic to think that just like with a ban, for example, it's going to like solve the problem immediately. Because people, like we were saying, people are going to get around it. And I think that's something that adults in particular don't understand just quite how integrated they are with one another.
Yeah, definitely. I think as well that, we touched a little bit on youth clubs and stuff. And I've worked with some incredible youth work charities, based in Devon and based all across the country, who run digital Discord servers for young people who might not be able to access a youth club because there might not be one in their area, or they might just not be able to access it for various reasons. And they have these Discord servers for young people to drop in and chat to a youth worker and, play Minecraft while you're on a conversation with the youth worker. And these are communities of thousands and thousands of young people who are safely moderated by these youth workers who are trained professionals. And if we were to, ban Discord, then those systems aren't in place anymore. And that's thousands of young people who rely on that for their youth work aspect because they can't access youth clubs. We're then throwing away youth clubs even further because at least now they've adapted to digital, and then that goes as well. Yeah. So that's another big thing to understand as well.
Definitely. I think that you guys were naturally moving into this question, but if your goal was to protect young people online, what do you think would actually work better than a ban? And I want you to direct this can be to parents, this can be to your other peers, this can be to the policymakers who are devising this legislation. Take that any way you would like, but what's going to be more effective than a ban?
I think probably the most important thing would be to either convince or force the social media bosses to remove some of the most addictive things, such as infinite scrolling or the addictive algorithms, or all of those other things. That would probably be more useful than that, because it would mean then the people would naturally want to use it less, so they could then do other stuff and then use it correctly and use it in useful ways that aren't damaging.
100%. I really agree. I mean, we at FlipGen have the For Us campaign, and that's exactly what we talk about, is the fact that young people need to be empowered with the agency and the choice to spend time on social media if they want to, and if it's beneficial to them, and come off of it when they also want to. And maybe at the status quo, there are features that mean that that's harder and harder for young people to do because the balance isn't there. I think from talking to young people all over the country, they find it hard to come off. Obviously, we're all here talking about that. But at the same time, yeah, it can be beneficial. And I think when it comes to young people, it's all about agency and transparency and ownership, because in so many aspects of our lives, we don't necessarily have that agency and that transparency. And so I think, I think in terms of what needs to be done to make young people safer, I think they need to be given the choice. And the way that we give back that choice is by looking at platform design and also getting rid of the harm, because social media can be really beneficial, but at the moment, the veil of harm is so thick that you can't see through and get to the good parts. And I think it's on platforms and government and whoever else to lift that up so that we can actually get to the benefits, because it can be so beneficial, but just as it stands, we're clearly not there. Yeah.
I think one of the main problems with that, though, is that social media bosses are getting profits from people being addicted to sites. So I think they're probably going to sadly be forced more than convinced to do these things. And yeah, like the question is, how do you force them? Because most of them are in America, and we don't have control over America.
Yeah, I was thinking like the same thing, like, with I think all of the things that like in the long term actually like harm people who use social media, like say the addictive kind of thing. You guys probably also like relate to this, but whenever I'm watching a video, if it's like I don't know why, but on TikTok they've introduced like, 10-minute long videos that can last ages. So you're there holding onto the screen. It will even be like a quick video anyway, and I'll have to hold down the screen to like 2x speed because that's just what it's training you to do. Because I can't handle like, when things like are taking long, or even if like the teacher sent me like a documentary to watch, I'll put it on 2x speed because I'm like, can we speed this up? I can't pay attention. And it's like, no, that's the thing with TikTok. I think we mentioned like earlier today, it wasn't in the podcast, but it was like, how with say even like kids, like, shows or stuff like kids watch, it's like really like, bright colors, quick scene changes because like social media harms their attention span. So I feel like if like social media companies kind of took action to maybe remove features so that it forces us not to have such a bad attention span. And I think it was mentioned earlier that like how social media apps are kind of like, turning into each other. So there's like, the scrolling thing, which has become like, it's on YouTube, Instagram, like even Snapchat, it's on LinkedIn. It's crazy because all we have to do is just scroll. So, and then another feature is obviously like the kind of trends and like, because trends, they can be good, like, I mean, trends I think have more negative impact than good because say fashion, for example, like consumerism, there's one trend, everyone wants to buy that thing. But then you're just kind of sitting there with a bunch of like clothes that have gone out of fashion so quickly. And it happens with like, all these different, like I get this a lot on my For You page, like aesthetics and like makeup looks. That's just because I'm into that stuff. But then it's kind of like, when you don't fit that standard and when you're not keeping up with every single trend, it kind of takes away your individuality because if you're always chasing like what's everyone else doing, or like I don't know if you've seen those videos, like what's everybody wearing this summer, and I'm like, can we just be individual, like wear whatever. So I feel like as social media, like maybe put restrictions, like obviously I think restrictions in general just need to be heavier. There's so much stuff I see that I'm like, how is it still up? Like it needs to be like, how is it bypassed? So I think those in general, but also restrictions, like, because how you get age restricted videos? I think some of my friends have them. I don't know why I don't get them, but it's like, when it's like this video has an age restriction. And I think those aren't on enough videos. I don't think it's even about age. Like whether you're, I think as Connor mentioned before, like even when you're over 16, you're still subject to, being negatively impacted by social media. So I think just restrictions in general should be put down on what can be uploaded in general. So no matter what age you are, like you'll likely be affected as a young person, but no matter what age you are, like you'll be safe from that. I don't think it should be cut off at 16,
I think that's a good point as well, that, everybody's affected by social media. It's not just young people. And I think that's the thing that needs to be brought into this conversation, is that parents equally probably have very similar, if not worse, screen times. I know many parents that will say, no, you can't use social media whilst that's scrolling through Facebook and things like that. And I think that's just something to bring into the conversation is, social media is bad, can be bad for everybody, not just young people. And that's really important.
Yeah, sorry. I think I might just like combine the last question and this question because like everybody was talking, I didn't really want to like interject. So, in terms of like what policymakers forget, I think they forget that like there's a difference in like how people use social media and how people spend their time online, depending on, for example, like where people's backgrounds and even like whether it be like their ethnic background or where they live and whatnot. And I think that does, people do forget that. Like I personally, a lot of the accounts that I follow on Instagram are accounts that raise awareness and shine a light on, for example, what's not talked about in like the mainstream news cycle. So like, for example, the humanitarian crisis in Sudan or the one that's going on in the Democratic Republic of Congo, because those things aren't really spoken about in, for example, mainstream media. And I think that goes kind of hand in hand with like what's more effective than a ban, because I think young people should be given more opportunities to become more like politically literate and digitally literate as well. So that, for example, when it comes to like being online, they can, for example, be able to spot the difference between like things that are real and things that are false, especially given the rise of AI, because you will just see things. It's actually getting pretty good. Like, whoa, like, yeah, it's getting pretty good. Of like, it's hard to tell what's real and what's false. So I think that this should really happen in basically all major institutions in society. Education is compulsory, school is compulsory, so it should definitely happen where kids are spending 6 hours of their day, 5 days, 5 times a week, 39 weeks a year. So it should definitely happen there, but it should also happen in the home, possibly with parents and guardians as well, and in other places as well, like community centers and whatnot. And so, yeah, that's my point basically. I think what might be more effective than a ban is just overall making people a bit smarter, because people on the internet come and they just say not so great things, not so intelligent things. And also alongside that, I'd also say we should make support for people more readily available too, like on these different platforms, ways to signposting for where you can get support for something you might have seen that distressed you, how you can report this sort of thing, because that isn't always easy to do essentially for people.
Wow, that was so good.
That was
That's like everything I wanted to say. So
Yeah.
well done. Like, seriously.
I spent a lot of time thinking about it.
Very. But like exactly that's like the past like 2 months. That's exactly what I think we've all been trying to say, is that like young people need to be given the tools to discern what is actually online, like acknowledging the fact that we live in a digital world. There's a lot of stuff out there. A lot of it is good. A lot of it is bad. And like people need to know how to navigate that rather than just being ignorant to the fact that they're going to look at it. And they also need to be supported, because if we're saying that social media is our support and you don't want us to be on social media, we need the support. And if that's not there, then it's not going to work. I think there's like a bit of a mismatch we're seeing in terms of like turning off the thing we use for like education, support, community, and not necessarily having the education, support, and community in the real world to sub for it. So 100%. I love it.
And I think that point, combining what Valerie was saying about digital literacy and Cosmo's earlier point about agency and autonomy through education, I feel like I would definitely say that young people will be far more informed and ready to make decisions such as Finley's when he decides to have no social media point blank. Because if you're not educated and you're not aware of what the harms could possibly be, then because all your friends have it, you're going to automatically think, oh, perhaps it is the thing I have to do. Like, FOMO, especially amongst teenagers, is very common and very right.
Yeah.
And I think, to Valerie's point, being able to detect unsafe sites, fake news, especially with the rise of AI, how to report harmful content, how to stay away from silos and areas that you're going to get sucked into rabbit holes, often without even realizing it's happening until you've entered 30 minutes of where on earth did the time go of what was the last 10 videos I just watched. And also, really importantly, detecting misinformation are all things that through education can be competent, can be explained to young people, and also will help develop that point about trust we were saying earlier, especially in terms of speaking to adults, speaking to policymakers. If parents understand the fact that their children are being taught effectively youth-driven and like youth-understood lessons and classes on social media, on the harmful aspects of it, how to move past the harmful aspect, how to use it positively, there'll be far less pressure to ban it completely from 16 because there will be effective implementation like way before the kid is even 13 and able to even access these sites in the first place.
I think before any government is to make a change on social media policy, especially for under-16s, we need to consider all the positives that comes from social media. I mean, for example, the UK Youth Parliament is using social media to campaign for our e-petition for civic education. You've got charities like Henry Dancer Days who are able to campaign for children with cancer, and Camp Kids who are looking to fundraise for kids and amputees, to have experiences together, and build communities that with like-minded people, to share experiences and think about solutions to overcome difficulties, for example, may have prosthetic leg. So we should really evaluate all the good things that come out of social media. I remember back to my GCSEs, I used different YouTubers to help me, familiarise myself with English literature, Christmas Carol and all the different topics we used to learn. And, banning YouTube, is that really necessary? And what do we class as social media? Is it WhatsApp? Well, WhatsApp is helpful for families to stay connected while your kid is walking to school. uh, you know. So we really need to evaluate that. And then what should be done is a consultation with all the parties, all the stakeholders who are involved, the parents, the teachers, the children, local councils, anybody, social workers, to really find out what they think about social media, what its impacts are, and then thinking about the solutions to those impacts and solving those. Because eliminating social media for young people is not eliminating the impacts. Working on those impacts is going to eliminate the impacts. So the government should be doing that by putting pressure on the big companies through Ofcom and other policies like that. Yeah.
It's a mic drop moment. Okay, I have one last question for you guys. This is a quick fire. I want like a couple of words. My question for you is ban, no ban, or something else, and what is that?
I think place really heavy restrictions on like the issues that affect social media users in the long term.
I think that we can do better than a ban by putting in comprehensive digital literacy and tightening up regulations.
I don't think they should be banned because it's going to eliminate opportunities for young people. It's going to exterminate the communities that people are already part of. Instead of a ban, there just needs to be more pressure on the big companies that are causing all these horrific things. They're allowing harmful content to be viewed by young people.
Yeah, I think a ban is a temporary solution to a much bigger issue, and I think we need to be addressing that bigger issue rather than trying to put a plaster on that.
No ban, and redesign technology in a way that is ethical and limits the profiting and benefiting from showing children and young people harmful content.
I completely agree. I'd say no ban. And if I had to sum up in 3 words, I'd say education, regulation, and the last one won't rhyme, but support.
No ban. Instead, the 3 policies in the Forest Manifesto should be implemented.
I think we should try and get the social media companies to remove all the addictive parts of the apps through probably having to force them. I also think youth centres should probably be funded more so that there'd be more places for people to be offline and spend time with each other.
I want to say a huge thank you to the Children's Commissioners, ambassadors, and to the Digital Rebels from FlipGen for sharing your experiences and your perspectives. I was so inspired by this conversation, and what today's discussion shows more than anything is that young people must be part of the conversation when decisions are being made about our lives. And this potential ban on social media for under-16s is no exception. If you enjoyed this episode of Flip the Script, please make sure to subscribe so you don't miss future conversations, and stay tuned for so much more incredible work from FlipGen and the Digital Rebels. You can find more information about how to follow along with FlipGen's work in the description of this episode. Thank you so much for listening.